Whitney Johnson is the grand dame of disruption. And what I love about her is that her latest career, I guess, S-curve as a disruption advisor was sparked by working with Harvard professor Clayton Christensen, who I studied in business school. And I love it because I think of you thinking about looking at companies and disruption and thinking, we got to think bigger. Let's just apply this whole thing to like our whole lives. So that is just fabulous. And now after many books, and including Disrupting Yourself, but even more importantly, the latest coming out in January, which is Smart Growth. And that's available for pre-order. And I've already pre-ordered it and can't wait to see more. I'm really excited to have you at the Future Proof Masterclass with this great diverse group of people. So welcome, Whitney.
Oh, thank you, Diana. It's I'm honored, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And so I'm really looking forward to having a very robust and lively conversation over the next hour.
Absolutely. So you have content for us. So yes, I will hand it over to you for a little bit.
Yeah, so what I would like to do is about 10 minutes worth of content. I'm going to show you my slides, show you my slides. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to share the screen, do all that fun stuff. It's that little dance that we do.
All right. You're so good. You've already put yourself in the chat, Whitney. I was just looking. You've got Hong Kong, Mumbai, Manchester, London, Abu Dhabi. I think Suyen might be dialing in from the polar circle. She was doing a marathon up there.
All right. So
all right.
Ready to go. So what I'd like to title our conversation that we're going to have over the next couple of minutes is Getting Smart About Growth. And I want to introduce you to 2 data points just to set the context for the conversation that we're going to have. Not too long ago, Egon Zehnder did a study. So this is data point 1. So Egon Zehnder did a study. They surveyed 1,000 CEOs. And of those 1,000 CEOs, 80% strongly agreed, 100% agreed, or 99% agreed, that in order to transform the organization, they also needed to transform themselves. Now, as you're listening to this, you're probably like, well, yeah, duh, except that prior to the pandemic, only 26% of the individuals of these CEOs believed that they needed to transform themselves as well as the organization. And so there's this stirring, there's this groundswell of people recognizing and believing, and all of you likely already knew this and believed this in your heart and soul, that to transform an organization, we need to transform ourselves, that the fundamental unit of growth in any organization is the individual. So I wanted you to, first of all, think about this data point, that there is this move, this tectonic shift afoot, which is very exciting, and people recognizing that we need to transform ourselves. Now, the second data point I want you to be aware of is that now that people have this momentum, this energy, this impetus to move forward, there is always the risk that we walk in circles. And that has been said, and we think of it metaphorically, but in fact, it is accurate. There was a study done by the Max Planck Institute, and they took people into a forest, and they said, we want you to walk in a straight line. And so they had no landmarks. They just needed to rely on their sense of direction. And when it was over, they asked them, so how do you think you did? And most of them said, we did pretty well. We walked in a straight line. But the GPS data told a very different story. The GPS data said that they walked in circles as tight as 20 meters. And so when people didn't have landmarks, when they didn't have indicators, they walked in circles. So we've got this momentum, this desire to make progress, but we also are in a situation where without landmarks, without a way to orient ourselves, without a guide, without a map, we are likely to walk in circles. And so what I want to retitle our conversation that we're having is, I want to make progress, but now what? And so what I'm going to do over the next couple of minutes is introduce you to a model. It is a simple simple visual model, and it's meant to be simple because then we can remember it, that will answer questions like, why is it so hard for me to start something new? Why, once I do start, does it become pretty easy to maintain my momentum? And why do we outgrow things so quickly? So we get really good at something and then feel like, I need to do something new. And when you understand what growth looks like, and that's what we're going to talk about, this simple visual model of what growth looks like, then you increase your capacity to grow. Now, before I show you this map, which I'm going to show you in just a minute, I want to tell you a little bit about myself and how I got to this map, this journey of discovery for myself. So my background is I actually started with a degree in music, so I know whereof I speak when I talk about disrupting yourself, but ended up on Wall Street. I started on Wall Street working as a secretary to a retail broker, but then discovered accounting and finance and economics and was able to move up into investment banking, disrupting my mindset of what I believed was possible, and eventually became an equity analyst. And while I was an equity analyst, I was trying to understand, and you all who deal with emerging markets may remember this as well, in the early 2000s, one of the things that was happening over and over again is that I would put out these estimates of here's what wireless is going to do. Here's what wireless penetration will be over the next quarter. And every single quarter, they kept on beating my estimates. And I was trying to figure out what had happened. And I came across the book, The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen, and suddenly understood this framework of disruption and realized, oh, that's what's happening. Wireless is disrupting wireline. So now I had this explanatory mechanism for the stock calls that I was making. It wasn't too far of a leap because I find myself continually wondering, how do those theories apply to us? I wondered, does disruption also apply not only to products and services and companies and countries like Singapore? It's also about people. And so in a couple of years, I decided to disrupt myself. I left Wall Street. I co-founded the Disruptive Innovation Fund with Clayton Christensen, who had written The Innovator's Dilemma. And as we were investing, I had this second big insight, I would say, which is as we were using the S curve that was popularized by E.M. Rogers in 1962 to help us figure out how quickly an innovation would be adopted, I had this aha that this S curve could also help us understand how we learn and how we grow. And this is the X marks the spot. This is the treasure map. This is the map that helps us understand what growth looks like. And as I said a moment ago, when we understand what growth looks like, we increase our capacity to grow. We're able to orient ourselves. We know where we are on our mountain. We have this map of the emotional journey of growth. And so now let me just walk you through what this looks like very quickly. And then I'll look forward to having a conversation about where you are on your S curve and how you might apply it in your life, and as well as to the people that you work with and possibly the people you coach and manage. So the S curve, what you know is that there are 3 points on it. And whenever you start something new, you start a new job, you start a new role, you start a new project, you start a new relationship, you are at the launch point of that S. And it's going to feel like a slog. Growth is happening, but because it's not yet apparent, it feels slow. But then you put in the effort and you accelerate into competence and confidence. This is where all your neurons are firing. You feel exhilarated. And this is the place where growth feels and is fast. Then, as you approach mastery, things will become easy. But because you're no longer learning, you're no longer enjoying the feel-good effects of learning, you can get bored, and growth is in fact slow. So here's how you're going to remember it. Slow, fast, slow is how you grow. Now here's what's going on in your brain. Your brain runs predictive models. I'm going to answer those 3 questions I said I would answer in just a minute. So your brain runs this predictive model. You start something new. You're at the launch point. You've got this hypothesis of what is it going to take for me to move to the top of this S curve. And as you're making these predictions, a lot of them are going to be incorrect. And because they're incorrect, you're going to have drops in dopamine, which is why it's hard to start something new. But then you keep making those predictions, and those predictions will become increasingly accurate. And that's when you move into that sweet spot. And the reason the sweet spot is the sweet spot, the reason it's so exhilarating, is you're getting lots of upside surprises with your dopamine, like, oh, that worked. That worked again. And so it's very invigorating to be in that sweet spot. And that's why this is that place of growth, not only being fast, but feeling fast. And that's why once you start, it's easy to maintain that momentum. Okay, so then you've got in mastery, what's going on is you're now in this place of, okay, you've figured everything out. The predictive model, it's pretty accurate. Like, you know what you're doing. And so you get a little bit of dopamine, but not very much. And that's why it's bored. And that's why you get bored. And that's why growth slows. And so what I'd like you to do for just a moment is take your hand and just draw this S curve. I want to see you do it, everybody. Take your hand, draw the S curve. Okay, see, here, ready? Let's do it together. 1, 2, 3, draw the S curve. I see some of you being reluctant. There you go. Okay, maybe there's a delay. And I want you to think about, where are you in your current role, in your life? Where are you on the S curve? Because again, when you know where you are, you start to have information about what you need to do next. You know that growth's going to feel slow. So, okay, I probably need a lot of support and encouragement at the launch point. In the sweet spot, you know, okay, things are going fast, so I need to make sure I focus so I don't derail. And in mastery, you say, growth is slow. I need a new challenge so that I can continue to grow. So this is what allows you to have this simple visual model of what growth looks like. Now, one quick story, and then we're going to have a conversation. So you're probably thinking, okay, I got it. I understand that I can use this to think about my own growth, my own development. How can I use this? How can I apply this with the people that I work with, people around me that I also want to see grow? How can I use it for talent development? How can I use it for succession planning, for team configuration, etc.? So let me give you just one quick example, and then we will have our conversation. So this is an amazing company. They're called Chatbooks, and it was founded by a husband and wife who had this situation. They have 7 children, and discovered that their youngest was going through this scrapbook that his teacher had made for him, enjoying the pictures. And she realized, I don't have anything like this for my children, and I don't really have time to do this. And so why don't we turn these Instagram photos and the photos on our camera into a book? And so Chatbooks was born. It's now a company with $50 million in revenue. They're growing. They're going to continue to grow. They like the culture. They want it to stay that way, but they have a challenge. And that challenge is that they have a number of people who have been there for a while and who are in mastery on the curve. And they're wondering, well, what do we do? What does that look like? How do we make sure they stay engaged? And so what we did is we administered our S-curve insight tool, and we found that of the senior team, only 1 person was in the sweet spot and several were in mastery. Well, now what were they able to do? What kinds of conversations were able to take place once people knew where they were on the S-curve? Let me give you 3 examples. One is the chief marketing officer, who'd been there for 7 years, suddenly had a language, suddenly had a way to say, you know what? I love Chatbooks. I love working with all of you, but I'm bored and I need a new S-curve. In this particular instance, there wasn't a new S-curve for her here at this company. And so now she's gone to be the CMO at a DeFi startup. So that's one example. Another person, who's the president, who was in mastery, had a very different conversation. He realized, oh, I want to be president, and I do think there's a lot of room for me to grow, but the CEO is doing a lot of my job. So how can I move him off my S-curve so that I continue to have room to expand on this current S-curve that would allow me to not feel like I'm in mastery, but in fact, in the sweet spot? And then the third conversation that took place, and this is the person that's currently in the sweet spot, is he's the chief technical officer. He has recently expanded his roles and responsibilities, also been there for a while, but some of those responsibilities pushed him onto the launch point of the curve, doing lots of new things. And by understanding this language, by having this artifact to have a conversation, it gave him permission to say, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. I sometimes feel overwhelmed. I sometimes feel discouraged. That is normal. I'm at the launch point of that curve. So recapping very quickly, you've now got this simple visual model to understand what growth looks like. When you understand where you are in your growth, you increase your capacity to grow. You understand that the fundamental unit of growth in an organization is the individual. And now you have the artifact to make sure that you're giving every person, including yourself, because everyone's on an S curve, an opportunity and the tools and the language that they need in order to grow. So with that, I will stop sharing and we can have a conversation.
Wow. Yeah. We're way ahead of you. We've been having a conversation in the chat already, but
I'll join the conversation now.
No problem. So it's just been really interesting because a lot of the questions that I thought to ask you are questions that I had when I was reading and thinking about it, and I got to at least take the assessment, so I didn't have to figure out where I am on that, and I was tested in the sweet spot. But a lot of the things that you see in the chat are things like, I am on.
Oh, you just muted.
Sorry. Yep. Sorry.
Yeah,
Twitchy
okay,
fingers. I different S curves in different parts of my job even. So, and one of the things as I look out at the future of work and I talk to people about portfolio careers is, how do you think that that's, going to interact with this idea of, one S curve in your career?
Yeah.
How, you must be thinking about that.
Yes, absolutely. I love that, Diana. And I think, so as it sounds like some of you have surmised, and I haven't read the comments yet, but if you think about it, it's very much a fractal because your life is an S curve overall, right? And I like to think of it visually in terms of a wave. So your life is an S curve, and then you've got a career of an S curve. And then in any given job or roles, an S curve. But one of the things that you've said, this idea of a portfolio of curves, that's one of the ways that people can stay in the sweet spot for a very long time, because they can say, all right, well, I'm doing these 4 things right now. And one of those things I'm actually in mastery, but that's balanced by these things that I'm doing that are at the launch point. And so there's this continual feedback mechanism that's allowing you to feel like as a person, as an individual, you are growing because you've got this portfolio of S curves, which by the way, are not just professional, but also personal. So you may have an S curve at work that's fairly easy because you are taking on this towering S curve in your personal life. And so everything balances each other, just like, again, I've got a stock and money management background. I love the idea of a portfolio. You buy, you sell some curves, you hold some curves, but I do think that you can absolutely craft your life as a portfolio of S curves.
Yeah. As Gwen just put in the chat, as a parent, I can't seem to get out of launch. That's well put. I feel like that.
Line of the day. Okay, Gwen, that is so good. We have 2 children. We have a son who's 25 and a daughter who's 21. And yes, like, you feel like you know what you're doing. And then now we're trying to figure out how to be parents of semi-adult children. And it's hard. It's really hard to figure out how to do that. So I'm totally with you. I'm locking hands in unification with you, Gwen.
And that's sort of terrifying, Whitney, because my kids are maybe 5 years below yours, maybe 7, and Gwen's are maybe 5 to 7 below mine. So she's like, that's a long time for launch. So absolutely. I want to ask you also about, so Sheryl Sandberg famously once said that find a growth industry and work there. And so Bianca was saying, in terms of the field itself, I'm in the sweet spot, but my actual job is maybe in mastery. But likewise, you may be in a field like crypto or something where everything is at the launch phase. And I'm not sure, can you be in mastery when an industry is in the launch phase? Is there a better, if you had to pick one industry versus job, is there a perfect combination?
Yeah, so I think it's always preferable if you can be in a growth industry because a rising tide lifts all boats. But we've all had experience, well, maybe we haven't. Many of us have had experiences of being in a growth industry, a hot market, in a job, in a role with a boss where no growth was actually taking place. I think most of us have had that experience. I know I have. And so I agree with that in general. Now I want to also give a counter example that I think will illustrate how it's more important, the opportunity that you have. Here's the example. So in the United States, basketball is a big thing, as many of you likely know. And there was a team called the Sixers in Philadelphia. And they had, over the course of 4 years, the losingest record in the NBA. They had won 60 games and they lost 250 games. So it was bad, right? And so they hire all these people straight out of college, and their parents are like, why did you take that job? This sounds like an industry, not an industry, but certainly a team that is not growing. This makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But what they did, the managers, they said, all right, we've got these people, new recruits, we're going to teach them how to sell. We're going to teach them how to sell. We're going to give them skills. We are going to develop them. They even went so far to call their parents and say, hey, we know this looks like an idiotic idea. They probably didn't say idiotic. We know this looks like a very foolish idea, but trust us. We're going to trust the process. We're going to grow your kids. So they did. They taught them how to sell. And over the course of 4 years, this team, the Sixers, went from ranking number 5 in new ticket sales to number 3 in new ticket sales to number 1 and then number 1. Why? Because they focused on developing their people. And so, yes, all other things equal, new industry, absolutely. But we know that that is not sufficient for people to grow. You need to have an opportunity where you as an individual can grow, and that usually is dependent on the manager or person that you work for.
Wonderful. We do have somebody from the NBA here who very much appreciates the metaphor and the case study. So I think, Whitney, that I love the idea of the portfolio. I've found that and never been able to articulate it in my own life. The fact that I feel so grateful for the things I have mastery for, because it allows me to be at, beginner's mind another place, or really launch new things, but it's sort of like a stable foundation. Your assessment was really interesting because of the 7 accelerants. So you get to know where you are in the S curve, right? But then your assessment's really about why. And so for me, knowing, okay, I'm in the sweet spot, it was really useful to know what the weak points were, which were expectations, which is absolutely no surprise, unrealistic expectations, and constraints. And so I was wondering, not just to give you that as an example, but can you talk a little bit about the accelerants? Because knowing where you are is great, and knowing what levers you can pull to move yourself up and down the curve is really key.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So everybody put your thinking hats back on. So I'm going to introduce you to a second, as if you ever took them off. I'm going to introduce you to a second framework. So we've got this S curve that we've talked about, and it helps you orient where you are on the mountain. Let's say you're climbing a mountain of your S curve. Well, you also then have this backpack of tools that are going to help you climb that mountain. And that backpack of tools is what I call the framework of personal disruption, and includes 7 accelerants. And maybe as I'm talking, many of you can type it in the comments so that we can track. So the first accelerant is to play where no one else is playing. And that can look like a lot of different things, but I'm going to give you I'll explain what it is, and then we can go into more detail if you want. So you're taking the right risks. And when you're disrupting, there's two kinds of risk that I think about. There's competitive risk, where there's a big job, huge opportunity. You're all used to competitive risk because you think about it in business all the time. But for you as an individual, big job, huge opportunity. You just have to figure out if you can compete and win. And there are many instances where you compete for a job and you do win. But if you want to win even more, you're going to take on market risk. And market risk is you don't know if there's a job, you don't know if there's an opportunity, but if there is, there's absolutely no competition. And what we know from the theory of disruption is that when you're willing to take on market risk, playing where no one else is playing, your odds of success are 6 times higher and your revenue opportunity 20 times greater. So that's for products and services. And Diana, would it be helpful if I give just a quick story around some of these?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
I really loved them.
Okay, so on the market risk, the story that's most relevant for me, and I think will be helpful to you, is when I was in banking, my boss had gotten fired, and they didn't know what to do with me, because they probably wanted to fire me too, but I had really strong performance reviews, and I happened to be pregnant at the time. And so you don't hire people with strong performance reviews that are pregnant. So what did they do? They just shoved me into equity research, which, going from banking to equity research, at least at the time, felt like basically going from flying a fighter jet to a cargo plane. So my ego takes a huge hit. I get to equity research. Now I'm supposed to cover the cement and construction sector, but there's just been a merger. So they have a cement and construction analyst who's highly ranked. So the question then becomes, what do I do in this situation? How do I take on market risk? How do I play where no one else is playing? How do I figure out, what I'm going to do so I can be successful? Well, number of media companies going public, there's no analyst to cover those companies. And so as the theory of disruption would predict, rather than knocking on a cement door that was closed, I built my own media door. So I became a media analyst and eventually a telecom analyst, as I said earlier. And within just 1 year, I became a ranked analyst. That doesn't happen. Usually it takes you 4 or 5 years, if ever, to become a ranked analyst. But I was playing where no one else was playing. I was in a new market. And so the thing that I want you to remember is that when you play where no one else is playing, when you build a door for yourself, you build a door for your organization, for the people around you. So accelerant number one, and I'll encapsulate it with this: amateurs compete and professionals create. I know it's simplified, but it's very helpful as you're thinking about this idea of taking on market risk and accelerating yourself up that S curve. All right, questions, or shall I keep going?
Anybody? Questions? I think you're good. I just managed to put the 7 accelerants into the chat a little bit, but yeah, I think that
good.
it's, and I would say, yep, go ahead.
Yes, looks
We
like
have a question. Yeah, hi, Meredith.
I've got my mittens on because it's so cold where I am. Anyway, just in relation to, going where no one else is playing, is that sort of along the thought process of, creating a category because you can see that there is like a market need or a gap in information and education, and then, just honing towards that thing and sort of almost like creating a market for that knowledge.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you're familiar with blue ocean strategy, that definitely dovetails in that area. Is that question of, okay, I think there's a need, there's a problem that needs to be solved that's not getting solved. And we think about that from a product perspective, but it happens for us all the time as individuals, in the marketplace and inside of an organization, of like, there's this thing that needs to be done, and we find ourselves saying, someone should do that. Those guys should go do that thing. And you realize, maybe I am those guys, or I am those gals. That's when you're creating that market risk, because no one's doing it. It needs to be done. You could do it.
Yeah. So you're the product in a sense.
Exactly.
To start that. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as you're thinking about personal disruption, for whatever reason, my brain always goes to this idea of, if you want to bring management theory alive, apply it to yourself as an individual, because then you can internalize it. And once you internalize it, then you can operationalize it inside of your organization with products and services and companies and countries. So, okay, great question,
Fascinating.
Meredith. All right, so now I'm going to go to, amateurs compete and professionals. Oh, Diana, you said professionals create.
Yep, I love
Right.
that.
Okay, so let's go to number 2, and that is play to your distinctive strengths. And this is, so if you think about, you're moving up the S curve, and I'm going to talk about them in a sequence, but they don't have to be in sequence. But playing to your strengths is when you feel strong, you're much more willing to play where other people aren't playing because you feel strong. Think about it. You're much more willing to go climb a mountain if you feel like you can climb that mountain, as opposed to feeling like you can't climb the mountain. What's interesting about our strengths is that oftentimes we don't actually know what they are. So I know we've got strength finders, which is fantastic. I'm going to give you a couple of clues, then I'm going to give you some other little nuggets of advice. Number 1 is, one of the ways you can know what your strengths are is think about what exasperates you. So when you find yourself saying to someone, this is just common sense, or everyone knows how to do this, you're exasperated, everyone doesn't know how to do it, and it isn't common sense for everybody, it is likely that you have just stumbled onto something that is one of your strengths because it's just so easy for you. The second thing that I would really encourage you to do is when someone gives you a compliment, instead of deflecting it, the second it comes out of that person's mouth, remember that they're holding up a mirror to you and saying to you, this is your superpower. So write it down, get your phone out, record it so that you can remember it in the future, because those are the things that are going to allow you to accelerate up that curve. Now, the other thing that just to remember is that the reason that you don't necessarily know what your strengths are is that they're so reflexive. They're so natural. Just like you're blind to your weaknesses, you're also blind to your strengths. And because they are reflexive and because they are natural, it's likely that you won't actually value them. Like, that's so easy. How could that possibly be valuable? And so the thing I would really like to encourage you to consider as you're moving up that S curve is go do hard things. Do things that challenge you. Do things that make you feel alive. But make sure in your backpack, you're using those things that you do uniquely well, because that's how you're going to make this idiosyncratic outsized contribution, is leveraging what you do uniquely well. And then you've got this flywheel effect of your strengths interacting with playing where no one else is playing. So no one's there and you're good at this. You start to be able to move up that S curve. All right, I'm going to go through the rest of them a little bit more quickly. So you've got play where no one else is playing, take on market risk. Number 2, play to your distinctive strengths. Number 3 is embrace your constraints. So there is a tendency to believe, for all of us, and we all do it, if I had more time, if I had more money, if I had more buy-in from my boss, from the people around me, then I could really move up that S curve. And yet we know it's a law of physics that we need friction. We need something to bump up against in order to be able to gain traction. There was a postmortem done of 200 failed startups. And the number one reason that failed startups, that they divided into funded startups. So they had money, and unfunded startups who did not have money. The number one reason that the funded startups, the ones who had money, went out of business was that they ran out of cash. And it was only the number 10 reason for the unfunded startups. And so as you're thinking about moving up this S curve, I would encourage you, instead of looking at your constraint as something that's standing in your way, ask yourself, do that reframe that we're taught in coaching and therapy. Do that reframe of, how is it possible that this constraint is precisely the thing that I need in order to create? And I would argue, if you do a little bit of reflection, that your biggest accomplishments in your life were brought about in part due to a constraint, something that you didn't have enough of. So that gives you tremendous, tremendous energy and momentum as you move up the curve. All right, number 4 is examine expectations. And Diana, you talked about this a moment ago. So remember how we talked about this S curve, And at the launch point, you're making these predictions. They're not right. You have these expectations. Here's what's going to work. And then it doesn't work and your dopamine drops. So you want to examine your expectations. What's happening? What am I expecting to happen? And part of moving along that S curve is finding ways to get lots of upside emotional surprises as you move along. One quick hack that I find incredibly useful when I'm at the launch point, instead of making a list of the 10 things that I'm going to do today, I make a list of everything that I've done. I feel so good about myself. And I include things in there like, I fed the cats. I let the cats in and out of the house. I washed the dishes. I include all of those things. And that allows you to manage your expectations, get these upside surprises, because moving along that S curve is really this emotional arc of growth. And so if you can find ways to get dopamine upside surprises, regardless of where you are, that's going to allow you to gain momentum, because you won't get sidetracked by getting discouraged. Okay, number 5, step back to grow, step back to slingshot forward. You can think about this in terms of mobility. You probably, like I told you about my Wall Street story, I took a step back, or I was pushed back as an equity analyst, but it was a slingshot forward for me because it was a career maker. Also, one of the things that people are struggling with right now as we administer this tool is people are struggling to take time to rest and reflect and to recharge. And so you step back in order to slingshot forward, in part, is taking time to attend to yourself and to take a break. All right, number 6, leverage failure. Failure is a constraint. It is a tool of creation. And what I would argue is that we all make mistakes all the time. And so failure is not the problem. It's shame that we attach to failure. And I know for me, that is something that I've definitely worked hard on. I had an interesting conversation with Alan Mulally. He turned Ford around. He was the CEO of Boeing Commercial Airplanes. And I asked him the question, so how do you think about failure? And he said, I don't. I was like, what do you mean you don't? Like, you have to think about failure. And so I asked him again, try again. So no, really, like, what do you do? How do you think about failure? He's like, I don't. And by this time I'm thinking, all right, wait, it's just not computing in my brain at all. And so finally I said to him, no, really, like how? And he said, Whitney, I don't think about failure. I think about when something doesn't work, that's information. That is, he calls it a gem. It gives him information that allows him to get better. And what he's saying in that instance is he doesn't see failure as this thing that causes shame, that causes this referendum on who he is. It's just information. His ego's off the table. His ego's over here. It's safe. It's locked up. It's in the safe. They're just solving problems. And so when we can look at those failures that way as this constraint that will allow us to move up the curve faster, and how quickly can we iterate, then we're going to make it up that mountain. And then the final one that I'll mention, and then I'll stop, is be driven by discovery, to take a step forward, to gather feedback, and then adapt. And be willing to say, okay, here's what I think is going to happen today. And you do this all the time in any given day, right? You have a list of 10 things you're going to do, and you do 5, and then something happens and you adapt. And get really good, though, at taking that step forward, gathering feedback, taking it in. It's not a failure, it's just information, and then adapting. And you do that at the top of the curve, at the bottom of the curve, and everywhere in between. So those are the 7 accelerants. If you think about it, all of them are focused on creating, not competing. All of them are playing where no one else is playing, but more importantly, playing where you haven't been playing, putting those tools in that backpack so that you can accelerate up your S curve, whatever S curve or your portfolio of S curves you happen to be on.
Okay, I just have to like clap for you. It's so amazing, Whitney. I didn't realize I was opening up sort of a Pandora's box of, you having to unpack everything, but you did it so beautifully. I just feel really grateful and very blessed. And it was great. And your stories are fantastic. I have questions, but for those of you who want to, raise your hand and ask questions, feel free to raise your hand or pop things in the chat. One of my questions was, if I look at the S curve, I'm thinking, oh, I want to be in the sweet spot all the time. Is that true?
No.
No, I don't like intuitively, like I look at it and go, that's the shaded part in the middle. So maybe I want to be there. But at the same time, I'm like, no, really, that seems stagnant. So
You
tell me
want
more
to,
about that.
so what I would say is you want to be in the sweet spot of your life as much as possible. But in order for you to be in the sweet spot of your life, because the sweet spot is this place of optimized tension where it's hard, but it isn't too hard. And it's definitely easy, but it's not too easy. So there's this optimized sort of ongoing tension. But if you really reflect, you will recognize that to be a peak performer, to get to that peak of the mountain, it relies on your ability to complete the growth cycle. It relies on your ability to navigate a launch point successfully, to be able to be a beginner, to be able to not be good at things, to be able to say, I don't know how to do this, and yet my identity, it's still intact. I'm doing this new job. Doesn't mean I'm a failure. It means I'm doing something new. That's an important part of growth. And so you want to be able to navigate the launch point successfully. You obviously want to navigate the sweet spot successfully in that place of optimized tension. And from a life perspective, and even any given day, you want to be in the sweet spot as much as possible. But also with mastery is your ability to, when you do reach mastery in something, think about people, we've all seen this, people who are in a job and they stay too long. They stay too long. They know it is time for them to go. And they won't go because it's too comfortable. They don't like it, but it's too comfortable. And so then the universe gives them a nudge. And so they get pushed off that curve. But if you can get to the point, and this is where, disruption writ large comes in, is if you can get to the point where you're at the top of that curve and you are, and you're willing to disrupt yourself, then you're acting and the curve is not, circumstances are not happening to you, and you're able to orchestrate the new launch point. And so sweet spot is the ability to navigate the entire growth cycle and the different parts of that, where growth feels slow, growth is fast and feels fast, and growth slows, and then you start all over again.
Yeah, I like the idea of completing the cycle. And certainly I have interviewed people when I wrote Future Proof, and they described being at the top of their game and kind of looking over a cliff, which I can kind of see as the top of an S curve now, and feeling like it was a really long way down. And a real, sort of metaphorical thing we tried to do is think about how can we make it look like, either a shorter jump because you know what the next S curve is, or you have some ideas, or maybe some stairs down, or Rita McGrath calls stepping stones over the river.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's good. Joe Murphy said, any tips on how we jump off the top of mastery and hit the launch pad happy?
Okay. Where's Joe? I want to see your face so I can talk to you.
Hang on a second. Forgive me. I'm just hi there.
Oh, okay. All right. I can see your logo.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. Whitney, a super presentation. Thank you so much. I'm sitting here in the UK with my mum. We're listening in, but that's what I thought. I thought Diana's question was excellent insofar as we all get to the top of that curve. We've hit mastery. You're right. The jacket gets a bit comfortable. We all feel very happy with what we're doing, but then it's okay. What do we do to therefore be willing to jump off and start all over again? Some tips and tricks.
Yeah. So it's a great question. Thank you, Joe. And hello to your mother. So what I would say when we're at the top of the curve, part of what is helpful here is just the reason that I love this model so much, and I understand that I'm talking my own book, but I love it because it allows you to say, okay, so I'm at the top, and I now understand that if I stay here too long, this plateau will become a precipice. There's also a wonderful metaphor. If you think about mountain climbers, any altitude above 26,000 feet is known as the death zone. And if you stay on the top of a curve too long, it will become the death zone for you as well, because your brain, because you're not learning, and your body will literally start to die. And so the first thing I think is just
so dark, Whitney.
But it's true.
It is true. I know, it's a great metaphor. Oh, thank you.
So the first thing, Joe, is just to say to yourself, like, if I stay here too long, then I'm gonna, you're growing or you're dying, you're gonna stagnate. And I think that starts to motivate us. Why? Because we know from Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky that we're more motivated by what we lose than by what we gain, right? 2.2 times more motivated. So one thing that we can say to ourselves, and it does help, think about it. I'll give you a simple example. If I think about preparing to talk to you all this morning and think, I'm going to do a great job, it's going to be awesome, that does not motivate me as much as if I'm not prepared, it will be bad and I will feel bad. That motivates me more. It's the same at the top of a curve. If I think, oh, it's going to be so exciting to do something new, that's not going to motivate you as much as if I get pushed off, this is going to feel bad. Or if I don't try something new, my life will not be what I wanted it to be. That helps to motivate you. So that would be the first thing. The second thing, and this is on a brighter note, is when you're at the top of the curve, think about all the things that you can do automatically, right? No more dopamine, model figured out. You've got it wrapped. That now means you've got latent innovative capacity. That means that if you will unleash that, you can go into this period of tremendous growth and contribution and exhilaration and excitement. And so that can also motivate you to say, I can have this experience again where I can contribute in a really meaningful way. And we see this with people who retire, right? They stop contributing in a meaningful way. Whereas if they can say, okay, I'm at the top of an S curve, I'm going to jump to the bottom of a new one and do something new and contribute in a meaningful way. Bob Proctor, who I love, and we had him on our podcast, he's like 88 years old. He said, calm down. He's one of the fathers of human potential, kind of before Tony Robbins. He said, calm down, but don't slow down. And I think that is a wonderful, wonderful mantra. We want to learn to calm down, be in our skin, be comfortable with who we are, but don't slow down. So that would be my couple of suggestions, Joe, for you.
I like that.
Whitney,
Yes,
that
Jo.
was super. Thank you very much indeed. And I think that also links back to your point before about identifying one's strengths and being able to articulate those, because that gives you a bit of a comfort blanket to jump off with as well. So really, really helpful advice and super insights, Whitney. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I see that actually a lot now as we go into this moment when people are maybe very seasoned and kind of not really sure what to do next. And I've seen it very successfully applied to side hustles, or maybe, a creative endeavor like writing a book or angel investing, where they have a lot to give and a company still wants them around for that wisdom and maybe for that calmness, and they need something new to do. So within the company or outside the company, that can be incredibly successful. I really like the idea of the latent innovative capacity and also the depth zone, I guess.
I have Kay. Where is Kay? I want to talk to Kay. Kay, okay.
Hey, yes.
I love
She's
that.
That whole S curve. She's like, there's a lot more volatility in that S curve than what you showed.
Why, yes, it is, Kay. It is, right? I mean, this is a simplification to have this visual model, but as you pointed out, and maybe, would you like to share an example of the messiness? Would you care to do that?
Well, my career has not been a nice, neat climb up the corporate ladder in a straight line. Not at all. It's sort of been sort of over here and ups and downs and.
Yep.
And yes, I have mastery in certain areas and still total beginner in others. Yeah. So it just that nice neat curve that you drew feels really aspirational and wonderful, but my life certainly hasn't been like that.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point, so you've got this, and then all along the way there's all this jaggedness, right? But from a sort of a 30,000 foot view, it looks like that. In general, I think also you can use this, and for those of you who are reflecting on your life, you'll also realize that there have been times when you started to do something new, and it's because you were having this experience of, I'm at the top, I do need to go do something new. I'm feeling this sense of, it's not only boredom, but it's also this sense of, I believe there's something more for me. There's something more. I can feel it. And becoming the impulse. So thank you, Kay, for pointing that out.
Thank you.
I have a question that's a little bit moving towards the collective, because I love what you've done with teams, but also the idea that, you know, beyond companies, even like in the Future Proof course, we have sort of a bunch of people who are helping each other in various transitions. And I was wondering, you know, I talk also about teams and AI matching. Is there like a perfect team where you have like, if you have 8 people, you want 1 in mastery and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a great question, Diana. So what we've done is, as a starting point, as you're thinking about configuring your team, is to think about in your sweet spot, you want to have, again, starting point bell curve, 60% sweet spot, and then no more than 20% at the launch point and 20% in mastery. So that can be your starting point. But then what you're going to do is you're going to, depending on what industry you're in, depending on what stage of growth your company is in, you might configure it differently. And so, for example, let's say you're starting a new company, you are an entrepreneur. There's a lot about being an entrepreneur that you are at the launch point of that curve. You probably should not be hiring other people at the launch point. You need people who are either in the sweet spot or who are in mastery, who can coach you, who have expertise that you need. And so what you can do is use this bell curve as a starting point. And then as you think about your team, recognize that people in mastery have this expertise. They're at the top of the mountain. They have this perspective that they can provide. That is very helpful. Excuse me, I'll get some water. The people in the sweet spot are in this place of like, they know enough so they can ask questions and they can answer questions. And then people, you want people at the launch point. And if you don't have anybody at the launch point, you need to find a way to do that, because people at the launch point ask questions like, why are we doing it like this? Right? Why are you doing it like this? And sometimes we look at it and go, well, that's just the way we've always done it. And sometimes we're like, can you stop asking me that? Because we feel threatened. But we need that, why do we do it like that? And that it's questioning what you're doing in order to drive innovation as well. So starting point, bell curve distribution, but you're going to tweak it depending on what industry you're in and what stage of growth your company is in.
I can see that in boards, actually. You know, you have the new independent non-exec who comes and says, you know, why have we all done it this way? And you have the chairman, who's usually sort of the mastery level, and then hopefully a lot of people in the sweet spot as well. That's a good board composition. S-curve is applied to board composition. I love it. I might have to bring that in for our next Financial Times one. I have one last question before we go, and it is from Morgan. No, Madison, sorry, Morgan. Madison is not in video mode, has a question and a thank you. What do you recommend if getting out of launch and into the sweet spot always feels elusive, like it's not happening?
That's a great question, Madison. And so I don't have enough detail to be able to answer, to respond to your specific situation. One of the things that I would say is that there are times when, depending on the role that you're in, I know that there's been a company that we've worked with that they, as soon as people start to get into the sweet spot, they give them new assignments and they push them back down into launch point, which has created some discouragement because people don't ever feel like they're developing some competency. So that can sometimes be what's happening, is that your manager or the situation just keeps throwing new things at you. So you're not actually able to get into the sweet spot. Another thing that I would consider is that if the sweet spot is truly elusive, it may be that it's not the right curve. I mean, so one of the things that we saw from disruption is that you can be, when you take on market risk, that you increase your odds that it's the right curve, but there's still, that goes to 36%. There's still a 64% chance it's not actually the right curve. So that's something that you want to consider. The third thing that I'd like you to consider, and this tends more toward women than to men, is that we tend to be underconfident and don't believe that in fact we are capable when we are, which is why women are continually like, I'm not going to apply for that job unless I have all 10 qualifications out of 10. So again, I think there are 3 things that I would encourage you to look at. Number 1 is, are you in a situation where they keep on giving you more? So you are perpetually at the launch point. Number two, is it potentially not the right curve? And number three, is it the right curve, but there's this reframing that needs to take place of like, no, actually I am making progress and I just need to track where I am today versus where I was 3 months ago. See that, own it, honor it, and allow yourself to actually be getting good at something. So those are 3 things that I would take a look at.
Okay, thank you. We do have time for one more question, and it's a good one. Morgan, you said, I like to know what Whitney thinks is important for a person to recognize they're in mastery and when to jump off, and what makes a person want to continue to learn versus a person who becomes complacent.
Morgan, okay, great question. So you can be on a curve and feel like, okay, I'm at the top of the curve. And there are going to be some times where you look at it and you say, this is a summit, but not the summit. So there's enough happening that allows you effectively for this not to be the summit, but it turns out to be the sweet spot of yet another curve. So a reframing takes place. There is a new team configuration, a new project that comes along. So you don't need to change roles because things change enough around you that puts you back into the sweet spot. And we definitely saw that with COVID, where you had people who felt like they were in mastery and all of a sudden the world changed dramatically. And they're like, maybe I'm not in mastery, maybe I'm actually in the sweet spot. Now, to your more specific question, what we see when we administer our S-Curve Insight tool is people can show up in mastery. Maybe you remember this, Diana. The flag for us is, does this person say I'm feeling bored? And does this person feel like I feel like there's no upside for me here? And if you're having that experience, then that is an indicator that you're going to end up needing to do something new, because you will either leave or you will get complacent. And so that's where this becomes very, very valuable in working with people, because if you've got someone on your team, for example, and you're thinking to yourself, they're at the top of their game, they're in the sweet spot. But if they themselves are having that experience, like that CMO that I told you about, who's saying, I like it here and I like my boss, but I am feeling bored. I am feeling like there is something that I need to do. If you don't get in there really fast, they will become complacent and start to underperform, or they will leave. So those are the 2 markers that you're looking for, is a sense of boredom and feeling like, I feel like there's nothing new for me here. You want to look for those. If those are not in place and they're like, yeah, work is great, they can be a domain expert, but they're still in the sweet spot because they're enjoying the work. So you're looking at that emotional topography.
That's fantastic. Well, I have great news, and some of you guys have asked in the chat, and Whitney, I will send you the chat because there's lots of good meaty stuff in there.
Thank you.
Whitney has generously given us, and I will put it in the email that we send out after, a self-assessment. So you can actually find out where you are on the S-curve and go deeper into this. And that will be, everybody's like, yay, yay. That is a great introduction. It's a very generous gift. Thank you very much for that. And I will say, and Fez can put into the chat, the other way to do this is to go and pre-order her book, because in order for her to become a fabulous New York Times bestseller, we need to sell a lot of books. So get to it, guys, because tell everybody. And so it's really important for you. And I am so interested in all the things that you said. I want to go like 10 times deeper. So I'm really excited to get that in January. And I just wish it wouldn't take so long to come out. So thank you so much for your time, Whitney. That was a true masterclass. That was you really taught us a lot. I really appreciate that. And I think everybody had a fun time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And nice to meet all of you. It was wonderful to be with you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.